where.
Yeah, I don't know if this panel can help, maybe someone in the audience. I've been exposed to a project in Texas, and it's a geothermal site. In fact, they have dozens of sites throughout that part of the country, and they're looking for money. And so what I'm doing here is sort of thinking, are there utilities that might invest in a project in Texas to put green energy into a grid in Texas and get credit and return here in the state? Is that model even possible?
You're talking about getting renewable energy credits here in Washington for a project in Texas?
I think I am, yeah. I think that's one of the questions. So yes. Is the legislation set up in such a way that there's an incentive to invest and put green energy into the system?
So, in direct answer to your question, no. So under the Washington Renewable Portfolio Standard, the green energy needs to be produced in real time. So
it has to be produced in the state.
Well, it doesn't have. It's not the state, but it's the Pacific Northwest. So if you're outside of the Pacific Northwest, it has to be. Then the exception to that is it has to be delivered in real time. And so by the time you get to Texas, there's no way you're going to be able to deliver it in real time. You're not even on the same interconnection.
Right. I get it. And I would assume an investor-owned utility isn't looking for investment projects in the energy industry outside of your service area.
Well,
because Florida Power Light, of course, is doing all sorts of projects up here.
but they're not. That's not the regulated utility.
Yeah.
They're not regulated sub.
And we don't have a similar entity up here.
Yeah.
And not necessarily, some of our projects are well outside of the service territory. But typically, we don't have significant unregulated businesses. PSC doesn't.
Okay.
I don't know the details about how the renewable credits and stuff like that, but I would guess that it would be interesting to go to, all the utilities that are in ERCOT, which is sort of the Texas interconnect, which is odd in itself because they're just that one state and they sort of stand alone. But I know that might be a different conversation with them. There's certainly a number of big ones there.
Yeah, right.
But we're a long ways away here
Yeah.
from that.
Thank you.
Question for Ethan. You guys integrate lots of products, and it sounds like maybe even some hardware with software products for utility customers. What are your challenges when integrating those products and services from a contract perspective, like warranties, for example, and other sorts of contract terms? I assume there's sort of different cultures of the product producers that you're integrating and what their expectations are, especially on the software side versus utility customers' expectations for these products and their life cycle upgrades, updates, and such.
Well, that certainly points back to, from the technical perspective, the value of being involved with standards committee. And Helen mentioned, so you can be involved in developing and then look for the enforcement of using communication standards and modeling standards and standards-based transactions of information across systems. It definitely helps from a contractual perspective, being able to orchestrate a project and point back to, well, we've got a data dictionary, we've got a standard here that specifies how we should be able to interact with these devices, whether it's protection equipment or exchanging information between other neighbors and utilities. I would certainly advocate and look for having the use of standards incorporated into the contract. And in most utilities, more and more we're finding in the systems we deliver, we deal with the IT departments as the people buying and purchasing as opposed to the control room. See the pants operators from the old days. So, and there's generally a culture of wanting to adopt the standards for communication equipment. So in that perspective, it's good working with the IT departments.
So the IT departments of utilities have, do they participate actively in these sorts of boards?
Oh, yeah.
Or are they
Not,
stakeholders?
not to the same degree as vendors. When you go to standards committee meetings, it'll tend to be more vendors involved and not so many utilities, but there's some players that are very big in that. Hydro-Quebec will be big in EDF of France will be participating in the standards body. Southern Company tends to be very involved. And then vendors are doing it because they have to make those expenditures and learn and be moving towards the market, whereas the utilities don't necessarily have the business case to participate unless they're really thinking long-term about cost of upgrades. Outside of the US, we do a lot of turnkey systems, so then we have much more integration.
Thank you. First, gentleman in the back.
This is for John Clark. What are you working on now?
I'm on the board of a couple of technology companies, and looking for what my next full-time gig is. So I'm actually researching about 4 different early stage companies and looking at new opportunities.
A couple of the panelists mentioned the Utility Commission as kind of a player in all of this. Is there a dollar amount where their interest will kick in, or is it more conceptual? You can't recover the cost for that because it doesn't fit into one of their categories? What specifically do they look at?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think essentially the Utility Commission is interested in lowest reasonable cost. We're required to secure power for what's called the lowest reasonable cost. And that obviously depends on what's out in the marketplace. We are constantly comparing projects, new and emerging technologies. It's really hard to compete against big existing power resources that might be out there on the electric power side. So that's essentially
I don't mean to quibble here, but there's often, let's say, differences of opinion between reasonable costs. What constitutes a reasonable cost between the utility and the commission. And if you decide to do, for example, a rebate program for energy efficiency, and it's half your budget, they're probably not going to let you do that. And if you wanted to buy a new type of software program management system, where would they start getting interested? Is there a dollar amount, or is it more conceptual?
I would say it's more conceptual, as long as we can prove that, say, we're implementing a software system that will save money. This gets more to the O&M side. I have more experience with the power resource side and how we recover those costs. I don't know if Roger, you want to jump in on that.
Well, I think I would agree with Patrick that the Utility Commission, especially in this state, is looking at things more conceptually, and that at the end of the day, what they're looking at is that the decisions that a utility makes are prudent, and so it could be saving money, as Patrick said. Sometimes on things like software, quite frankly, we don't get a lot of scrutiny. But there's always the threat that the Utility Commission's going to dig into something, and I think it's the fact that they can dig into anything they want to, and they have the right to audit. That creates a culture of being very careful with decisions.
Thanks.
So this is directed towards Pat, right? The translation of a pilot in a small-scale PUD to a large IOU. If you develop financials on a small scale, we talked about having that presented to you and the mutual on it. Does it behoove an entrepreneurial small startup to take that small-scale pilot, scale it for you, deliver it to you outside of an RFP, just to chew on? Do you have bandwidth as an IOU to consider alternatives? I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those types of